Welcome to creating a level playing field for collaboration. How can we make a difference together in equity and mutuality instead of inviting people to participate in a project they do not own? In this series, we discover what works by sharing stories of lived experience from a diversity of wise guests, organizers, participants, facilitators, researchers of participatory projects. By sharing examples and insights, we want to contribute to co-creating a world that works for all. In this episode, we welcome Lucy Wairimu Mukuria, based in Nairobi, Kenya. Welcome, Lucy.
Thank you.
We are friends and we met several times before in conferences, and I was really intrigued by what you told me. Actually, I was shocked, more or less, by what you told me how often Western people reinforce colonial practices without even realizing it. And I noticed that I was also sometimes in that pitfall that I invite people to participate in really well-meant processes, but they are invited to my project. And you had some ideas and some stories to share about your experiences. So maybe you could introduce yourself a little bit more before sharing a story.
Okay. Happy New Year, everyone. 2025, sorry. I was thinking about 2022 specifically, and I'll tell you why. But 2025, like I was telling you earlier, for me, the year of beauty and storytelling. It is the Chinese year of the snake as well. And in as much as I think the snake is demonized, we also know that it has its wonderful and beautiful qualities. And I think one of the things that has happened to me is that, just in line with what you were saying, was I've been very curious about how different people, different cultures, different traditions understand the world, right? And just thinking about why I understand the world that I do in the way that I do, I think is what has led me to the many questions that I have. It doesn't ignore the experiences that I've had because, you grow up, you go to school, you go to work, and you're like, I'm just living my life. And then one day somebody says to you, get your dirty black African hands off my car. And you're like, oh, what is that? And then you run home and you tell your mother, and your mother is like, forget about it. And then you grow up and you realize they should have held your hand, gone like, how dare you? And if the person insisted on standing on their previous statements, maybe they should have received a backhand. I don't know. But what I'm saying is that I think part of the ability to, I think for myself, for Africans to stand up for themselves, we are learning how to do it for ourselves because I don't think we've been taught to do it. I think we've been taught to exist with it. And so you grow up, you go to like international schools, and of course there are people from different parts of the world, and you're coming from a space where you've been taught to respect everybody, and the issue of color is never an issue. And then you have this assumption that as long as we are black, we are one people. And then you are in the bathroom of this amazing restaurant come disco come cultural center. It's called the Carnival in Nairobi. Back when I was growing up, you would eat all types of meat there, from crocodile to gazelles to giraffes to when we were growing up. Nowadays, with all the conservation efforts, I think you can only eat crocodile and just pork and other types of red meat, but not fish. There's no pescatarian diet there. So anyway, it was a melting pot because that's where you could do that. But also they used to have like amazing music and it was like a dance hall and people would go. So we in the bathroom and there are these African Americans who are exchange students. And so we walk in and we're just like, all of us are black. So it's all good. And they go like, are you people sure you're Africans? I'm like, what do you mean? How is it we are darker than you? I go like, what do you mean? So in my head, I'm thinking, now is when I know it's known as colorism. So I'm like, wait, why are you upset that you are darker than us? And that's when I realized African Americans have a superiority complex over Africans. But the cognitive dissonance that they were going through was because they had associated their superiority not just to being Americans, but also to having the expectations that Africans should have been darker than them. So the fact that there were light-skinned Africans, it made them very mad in that sense. And I saw that trickle to the school and it became an institutional issue, right? And then I saw the things we are now seeing out here, or things that have been historical. A white girl or a white woman has a relationship with a black man, something goes wrong, and she turns around and says, it was sexual assault. And we're like, wait, did we all know they were dating? What is this? So having the opportunity to have seen that, I was also like, there is so much savagery in the races' interactions. But I think it's all pegged on this idea that the color of the skin matters. So, of course, then it was an institutional problem. And, I was in my late teens, my early 20s. My focus was on partying more than trying to solve that problem. So I let the institution solve it. And the institution solved it by, number one, dismissing the man, the African, saying like, she has said it, we believe her, that's the end of the story. And I was like, okay, that's not true, but I moved on. And then eventually there was a physical separation, right? And I was like, oh, that's how it's going to be. Like I said, my focus was on partying. So anyway, life goes on and I end up in a different setting and someone walks up to me and they say, did you leave the institution? By then I was in the military and we had gone somewhere for military training and they say, come straight to my face in a very aggressive way. I'm told you left the base. And I'm like, how do you know I left the base? And then he says to me, because I was told a black girl was seen. So I look at him and I said, do I look black to you? So, I mean, it's been this very thing that I think, like I said, we were not brought up with that consideration. But for me, realizing that I have to maneuver in this life, given that I consider myself to be a very outgoing and collaborative person out in the international space, that I have to be conscious of the fact that although I don't see myself as fast a black or African person, everyone else seems to. And apparently, I should care. And this is the problem. I don't care. It's not my priority, but it is their priority. They want to see me move like somebody who appreciates and understands that I am black, that I am African. But my self-esteem won't allow. Like, I don't have a frame of reference for that. I understand intellectually the colonial history of my country and how there is even the existence of the neo-colonial framework in my country. Like, I understand that the worship of whiteness is present. I understand it's, for me now coming to see for what it is, it's a trauma response. That's what I'll call it. Because where we are as Kenyans historically, if the white man did not feel respected enough, worshipped enough, needed enough, the African would be punished for that. They would suffer for that. So the idea of playing small is actually a survival tactic, right? So what happens in my case where I don't need to survive, I don't need to respect, I don't need to worship, I don't need to do all these things that the generations before me did in order to feel safe and secure. What if I don't? And it's a problem. right? Because what I've realized is that the world looking at Africa has been socialized the exact same way. Again, the storytelling, dark continent, uncivilized people, so many things. And then I move through life and I say, oh my God, you're the people calling us uncivilized? You have to be kidding, you know? So there's a lot of that, whether it is in hygiene, whether it is in food and nutrition, whether it is in upbringing, whether it is in medicine, whether it is in wellness, and whether it is even defense, whether it is in security, all those things. And now we are coming to a point where people are beginning to question, what is the origin of this? So we see it, yes, but what is the origin of this? And then when people listen to the origin of it and they're like, wait, I've heard this story before. It has been told when I was growing up. It's part of our fables. It's part of our mythology. It's part of our traditions and practices and all of that. And coming to the question, therefore, for me, for like, what am I actually doing? Like, am I trying to fit into a space that was created without my input, without my consent, without my inclusion? Why am I trying to fit into that kind of space? Which I think is what you started this conversation by saying. Like, if I was really meant to be part of that space, then there should have been inclusion. There should have been, what do you think about this? There should have been, how do you think we can improve this? There should have been, what would you like to see in this?
And how do you start such a process?
Yes. So for me, this is the thing that is now even guiding me in my work, because I think when 2022 marked 20 years since I started practicing psychology, and that's why it was significant. So in any profession, if you have a 20-year experience, surely you have your own idea about the work if you've been doing it. And so having that, I also started asking a lot of questions about even psychology and the training that we get from a Western perspective and stuff like that. And looking at even the laws that we have surrounding mental health, looking at the policies, looking at how the society understands it, going back and uncovering what these things. I was so desperate in my inquiry because I didn't find it in any of the books. I went to ask a tree. I kid you not. I went to ask a tree. I said, I had this tree and I'm like, how does abnormality show up in trees? Like, how do you guys cope? Like, what do you do when you have a tree that is bizarre or abnormal, or what do you do? Right? And I was struggling with this because I remember my first psychology class, that there was the definition of abnormality that was being given, and it was said that if majority of the people do it, it's normal. But if less than the majority are doing it, it's abnormal. And I always had a problem with that definition, right? Because it just didn't seem good enough. Because what if the majority of the people are saying white people are better than Black people? What if the majority of the people are saying Black people are subject to, like, that is the thing that's my mind, And I was like, I have a problem with that definition. But I also went further and I was like, we were told that mental illness exists between the ears of a person. It is caused by genetics. This person might engage in drugs. Like, it was made to seem like almost a person chooses not to be well. I also used to have a big problem with that. But now, to be able to say, hang on, but if you've created a world where there's a hard economy, if you've created a world where you prioritize other people based on gender, race, sexuality, marital status above somebody who has been doing the work. If you visit violence on people, wanton violence repeatedly, consistently, if people exist in a realm and a vacuum where they never know safety, if there is no willingness to take leadership as the opportunity to transform people's lives, and instead there's just corruption, how can people not be expected to be unwell? If children are being brought up in families where there's violence, how can we expect those kids to grow up and be okay? If we're neglecting pregnant women, someone told me a story the other day of how a lady was made to stand in front of the church and apologize for being pregnant. And I said, what is this? What is this? Because where's the man? Where's the man then? Where's the man? But I think also the idea that once you criticize this patriarchal religious fanaticism of doing things, you're the one who is targeted as immoral, as all those things, and you're excluded, you're excommunicated, But I'm like, I don't know. I think that for me, what I've concluded is that the thing that makes people ill is not an experience they're going through inside their heads, but I think it's the ability to see the cognitive dissonance, the duplicity, and the hypocrisy around us. I think that's what makes people ill, if you have to ask me. And I'll use the example of that lady again, because she stands up in church and she is told you have to apologize for getting pregnant without being married, right? But the man is not there. How about the only reason you know she's pregnant is because her belly became big. What if every time men impregnated women, their bells would swell and they would have to walk like they're waddling? Would they be made to stand in front of church and apologize for impregnating a woman? It would never happen. Because we live in a society where we've accepted that it is the women who should bear the shame, the punishment, and responsibility of engagements with men. But men should be able to do whatever they want without repercussions. And then we turn around and we say, I believe the children are our future. Really? Do you? Because if this woman didn't want to stand up in the church and apologize for being pregnant and not married, she would have aborted that child. But then again, you guys don't want her to abort the child. You say abortion is a sin. So what do you want? And you realize this is not about wanting or anything. It's about there's no care for the woman. There's no concern for her. We care about the children. Then the child is born. There's no plan for the child. There is no immunization. Maternal care now is no longer free in my country. Initially it was. Oh, but we value children. And then how do you expect such a person to not fall into, for example, postpartum depression? Are they abnormal or normal? For me, I would say they are normal. I think we should worry if the person does not suffer as a consequence of that sort of existence. Which again, for me, I think brings me back to how are we really understanding who we are? If we are confusing what is normal, a normal outcome from an abnormal situation for an abnormal outcome in a normal situation. Like this is where for me, my head just, it doesn't work. But then I look at where is this dissonance coming from? And I realize, I think it just comes from a lack of identity. We were talking earlier about our mothers and all, and I'm like, our mothers are everybody's mothers. So that means those are the mothers of the world. And I don't know, I move around and I realize women, irrespective of race, sort of having the same experience everywhere you go. It's only women of different races who think that women of other races are having a different experience from them. But women, irrespective of the race, are going through the same experience. And I wish this would be seen by women as an opportunity for camaraderie, to come together in solidarity, because even when we are talking about, and I swear it's a very bizarre thing. I went for a meetup the other day, and so one of the things I liked about Southeast Asia is that no one ever stared at me. No one ever looked at me like, wow, what is this Black person doing here? No one ever came to me and said, does this come out? Like what other Black people go through. No one ever, there was just one Chinese man. I was in a Chinese temple and I was roaming around outside, and one Chinese guy, old man with a big camera, comes up to me and says, oh my God, where are you from? And I said, I'm from Kenya. And he says, can I take a picture of you? And I said, can I take a picture of you? And then he says, fine. And he was cheerful. And I said, okay, fine. We can take photos of each other. That's fine. And that's okay. So I understand that idea coming from them. I'm exposed to it. But you see, his energy was also not like, what species are you? What age are you? And so, there was nothing like that. It was just like genuine curiosity of a person with good energy. And so the ability of not being stared at or ask questions like this, so can I touch your hair? Things like those. So I walk into this meetup and I'm happy because from the little I've seen, like I said, there was no process of integration. It was just smooth. So I walk into this space and there's one white woman. And immediately I walk in and people turn their attention to me and I say hi to everyone and we sit. I just noticed a shift of energy. And let me tell you the problem with being able to explain to people microaggressions that are racially charged. It's that you can never really say somebody said this to me or they pushed me or they shoved me or no. Sometimes it's just the way the person will cut their eyes at you. It's the way the person will look at you and their face will and their lips will perk together. And you're like, whoo, that person doesn't like me. And you're like, very well, it and they know it, that it has nothing to do with the content of the person of who you are. It's just that your color.
What I'm struggling with is how to start the process. You said it's all about identity, and it's not only about color or race or whatever. It's about realizing who you are. How to start the process with people to become more aware, better understanding of their own identity and others. Because then you have like the standard lines. Okay, you have to invite diversity to your conference, and without knowing it, you were repeating the pattern that you're not intending to repeat that pattern of I invite you. I am the one who invites diversity, but you have to do it together. And what I'm wondering, how do you do this in a respectful, compassionate way? What's your experience? Do you have maybe an example that you had? Okay, that was a good example of a situation where I felt recognized and in equity with others.
I'm thinking about your question and I'm asking myself, have I ever genuinely ever had that experience? Yeah, I believe so. And this was not just from a participatory experience, but from an organization experience as well. So, like I said before, I am aware, right, that I don't care about the fact that I'm Black. But I am also aware that people outside of my race, especially, let me just say outside of my race, this is all based on experience. Outside of my race, don't look at me or people like me and say, that's a Black person, that's a Black woman, and form ideas and expectations about how I should behave, how I should conduct myself, and how they should treat me. So I think the first thing is, for me, having that knowledge, how it helps me is that I'm never surprised, right? But I also don't think it's my job to be able to help somebody who has that kind of thinking stop having that kind of thinking, right? When I take part in, for example, the organization part of it, I will say, because I understand the world that we live in, we need to include 1, 2, 3, 4 things, right? And that is able to redirect and sieve those who will come into the space with that kind of notion. So I leave it entirely up to them to decide whether they will uptake the new knowledge that they are finding, the new learnings, and change their minds, change their behavior, or they may choose not to, but it's not my business to do it for them or to bring it to their attention or have a reaction if they don't. Mine is to ensure that I have, from an organizational point of view, included information that will bring that awareness and sensitivity. Now, from a participatory point of view, it's for me to be comfortable to say, what has just happened is not okay. What you've just said would be interpreted as to mean like to speak up and to not necessarily talk about how it makes me feel, but to talk about what has happened. I think that I have found to be very useful, right? And I'm tying this in with what you said in the beginning. Sometimes you don't know because it's how you've been socialized. So for me, I think as a psychologist, I understand the socialization bit of it because we were talking earlier about how the socialization of how to be women, to be mothers, to be wives. And even in the world we are today, you go somewhere, you're not married, you don't have children, and you have people in miserable marriages saying to you, how come you're not married? Again, just because it's a socialization, like it's a battery that is tuned in and the alarm goes off and, people. So for me, I feel it's the same even with race. People have been socialized in a certain way. And all I know is that if someone is to ask me, why are you not married? And then I turn to them and I say, oh my God, but you have such a horrible marriage. Why would you wish that to me? It wouldn't change what they think about marriage. They would still go to the next person who is not married and say to them, you're not married. But then if I just looked at them in the eye and I said, because I choose not to be married, that would blow their minds because they'd be like, what? You mean there's a choice? Because, the socialization is you must get married. And I'm like, what do you mean? So to be able to just have a sort of it's so important, this issue, that for me, what I've learned is I have to have an emotional detachment from it. It's that important. It's that important because sometimes I feel like the approach is even meant to provoke, you know? Like provoke so that you can prove your point and say, you see, these Africans, they're not civilized. What did I tell you? You see. So I'm like, it's so important. I have to be emotionally detached.
Can you do it?
I've done it. Like I told you, when someone walked up to me, to my face like this, their crotch was in my face because I was sitting, they were standing. Their crotch was in my face and they say, I heard you left the base. And I say, what? What? I'm right here. Why are you saying that? I'm told a black girl was seen. And I'm like, am I black to you? So let's start with the facts. But deep in my heart, I was boiling. I was boiling because black seemed to be the anchoring factor to the aggression and not the fact that I was literally seated in front of him. So there's no way I was outside the base, so it makes people lose common sense. So it's very important. It's too important for any emotional attachment to the ego when it comes to this issue of race, of misogyny, because if you're black, if you're a woman, if you're an African, you're a woman, those things go together. They go together. So there's that global phenomena of women, but if you're black, if you're African, that is another layer to it altogether. Like no one can see you any differently. And there's an expectation attached to that. There'll be a provocation attached to that. And the most important thing, like I said, is just to be emotionally detached.
Am I correct? What I take from your story, if it would be possible in our education to broaden socialization, to look at your identity in a broader way. You're not only a woman, you're not only black, you're not only a specific age, or maybe start some process to get a better understanding of the complexity of identity. Would that be possible?
I think that's what should happen, but at like a personal capacity for me, I would say it doesn't matter how much of that I will do if there is not a process happening across the aisle. Does that make sense?
Can you?
Because you see, again, again, I'll repeat. For me, my race, my gender, my ethnicity, my nationality is not a concern for me. Right now, my focus is actually connecting more with the cosmos and with nature. I want to be more in. That's where my focus is. But I understand when I go to these spaces, their focus is my color, my race, my gender. It's their focus. So I could decide, laughing because people have done this. And then they've asked, but what have I not done? Let me give you the best example. you're in a marriage, your husband is cheating, and then there's this thing women are told, you're not praying hard enough. Go into your closet, remove all your clothes, make it they call it a war room. Go there and pray and sweat and fast and, and do all those things. So that whatever it is about you that is making your man go outside of your marriage can stop. Like, so I feel like it's the same thing. So me, I'm not going into any war room and
So who is responsible? But
yes.
that makes me wonder, when we have a beautiful project like co-creating a world that works for all, and we want to invite diversity, better understanding, both sides of the ocean, black and white people or whatever. What can I do as a facilitator? It's not your responsibility to change the views of white people. I understand. But somehow I feel a little bit frustrated or ignorant even of how to work with it.
The thing is, some detachment is also required from you. In that, when I say to you, your conference is so white, your conference doesn't have diversity, your conference doesn't have alternate voices, emotionally detach from that and accept it as feedback. You see, that's another way that can be helpful on your end. You have to have a willingness to accept positive criticism, if you might want to call it that, or you might want to call it feedback, so that now the next time you're doing that, you will say, do I have alternative voices? Do I have different races? Do I have different ethnicities? Have I invited people from places I've never been to? Maybe it's even the first time I'm hearing about it. That's how you do it. So for the genuine people on the opposite end who want to make a difference, feedback is data. So, like, I've been to places, I'll be honest. I went to this place once where a friend of mine, and she said to this lady, because the lady came and said, oh my God, look at the way you guys did this thing. I wish you had told me earlier. I would have helped you. And she looked at her and she says, this is a function for Black people. We organized it the way we wanted it to look like. If it doesn't meet your standard or expectation, it's because it wasn't meant for you. And I was like, that is the best feedback she ever received. But she didn't take it like that, of course. But there is no day you would have sat with the lady who told her that and said to her, now tell me how to better support you. That's not what she would have told her. Maybe they would have talked for an hour and a half and talked about nothing. But that time when she said, this was a function for Black people, we organized it in the way we wanted it to look like. The fact that it didn't meet your standard or expectations means it wasn't meant for you. I was like, beautiful. This is beautiful. This is so beautiful.
Yeah, that's about purpose, intention.
Yes, exactly.
It's good to remember.
Yes.
But I remember the conference you attended in Noordwijk, and you were the only Black person. And for me, it didn't matter, but you stood out.
I did. What I was telling you, I was aware, but it wasn't like a problem I needed to solve. And so for me, until someone shows me they have a problem with me, it's not my problem. And I have to be honest, I did not have I think the people who attended that conference are the people who, now I'm talking about the people who are willing to actually open up themselves to the idea of how do we then transform this conversation? How do we transform our world? I didn't have a problem with that. But I have been in spaces where, like I told you, when I went for that meetup, and I could feel that energy of hostility from this white woman, and it felt like all this time, these people were listening to her. I walked in and now people are like, oh my God, where do you come from? Tell us something about your country. And then everyone now was listening to me and she was enraged. And I was like, you know what? This is not my problem. This is, you will have to, but if you look at it contextually, like even just, again, I'll go to marriages because that's what people can relate to the most. The health, the longevity, the existence of marriages really have been the burden of women. Like Here in Kenya, women will be told, you can bring down your family with your tongue. Yeah. It's not the fact that the man is cheating, not providing, being violent and drunkard. Oh, no, 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 no. Those things will not bring down the family. It is with your tongue, the wife. And what is the tongue saying? The tongue is saying, you're a no good son of a bitch and you need to style up. My God, you have broken your marriage. You have broken your home. It's the same thing. So that's the way it has been. Like, it's the responsibility of Black people to train white people how to be more inclusive, less racist, and get out of their white savior mentality. It's not. And for me, I think if there's something I want Africans, Black people to know, it is that it's not your job. Your job is to exist, to be beautiful.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you for sharing your stories. There's much wisdom in it. And maybe as a checkout, is there something you want to add or say as a closure?
I mean, there's a lot to say, but I think we just have to find our center, which is humanity. We have to find our center, which is just, at the end of the day, the rest is noise. I don't know if I've ever shared with you why it was so important for me to go to visit the Turkana boy. He's known as the Turkana boy. And, people are always saying Africa is the cradle of mankind. I don't know why they don't say womankind, but Africa is the cradle of humanity, let's call it that, of human beings. Not just human beings, but for me, I dare say humanity. So, and I'm a grown person, and I was trying to, again, who am I, my identity, and I ended up planning a trip to go and sit with Turkana Boy, which is basically a monument where the remains, they were carbon dated. It was 1.6 million. It's older than even the one that's called Lucy in Ethiopia. And it's weird because people know the Lucy of Ethiopia more than they know the Turkana boy in Nariatome in Turkana, whose carbon dating is actually 1.6 million years. And you get to that monument and it's desolate. And I was like, I think it's just a reminder that at the end of the day, like, if you don't advocate for yourself, you'll remain alone, because the monument is there and it's just covered with sand and heat, because that place goes for like 40 degrees Celsius to 45 every day. It's really hot and dry. And I sat there and there are all these placards that have been put up by Richard Leakey, who of course is the world-renowned archaeologist, and it pays homage also to the Kenyan he was with when they discovered this. Because again, Richard Leakey is a white man, so a white man can't come to Kenya, discover the origin of the first man, and he did it by himself. That's crap. So now even when you're talking about inclusivity, it is a job they did together, right? This Kibeu man, that was his name, he died 2 years ago, I believe. He was not an archaeologist, but he was able to understand origins. He was able to understand anthropology. And on that placard, it is written that all the people of the world, I crammed it, all the people of the world agree that this is where humanity started from. And the only reason, Tony, why your hair is that color, your eyes are that color, your skin is that color, is only because you moved away from the equator. The people before your people before those people moved away from the equator. That is all. So there is no God that said, I'm going to create this race to be more superior than others. You only moved away from the equator. If you're to move closer to the equator by 5 generations, your kids, the kids of your kids, yeah, they'll be, So that's all that it is. Distance from the equator. Diet and nutrition, access to sunlight, adaptation. That is all. Survival.
So thank you. All about humanity. Thank you, Lucy, for sharing your stories.
Thank you for listening. A new episode will be posted every 2 weeks with new exciting stories on how to create a level playing field for collaboration. I hope you will be back. Together we can make a difference in the world.